Hello readers, I'm Amy, here today to talk about reviews. So at the time of this filming, there's a lot of discussion on Twitter. Like, it's one of those things that comes in waves. Sometimes you're talking about it, sometimes you're not. But there's a lot of discussion on Twitter about how reviews are for readers. And I just wanted to have a chatty video about that because I sat on it for a while and I thought about my previous feelings and my current feelings, and I gotta say, this idea that reviews are only for readers, I disagree. And I want to talk about why I disagree, and I want to have a commentary on it. I'm not saying that I'm right and you're wrong. This is just a conversation. So I feel like the whole idea of reviews are for readers kind of highlights a double standard. Now, I'm going to come at this conversation from the perspective of an artist. I've never really considered myself a writer, though I have done some writing. But being an artist for most of my life, I have had to deal with critique. So back in high school, trying to grow a thicker skin, trying to get better at art while also learning how to accept feedback. Like, that's something you do as a youth, as a teenager. You learn to accept that feedback. People are like, you have to be able to accept those critiques on your work, and that critique is going to help you become better. And in college, with structuring things, there's a lot of discussion on how to structure a critique. So the idea is you say something nice or neutral, you give them the critique, and then you finish off your statement with something nice or something neutral. That's kind of the basics of it. And that's how I've learned to give critiques to my peers in school. That's how they give critiques to me. And whenever I'm working with friends and family and clients on logos, on artwork, I'm like, give me feedback, because this art that I'm creating, yeah, it's personal to me because I'm the one creating it, but it's for you. It's for an audience, and I want to know that my audience is going to appreciate this artwork. And I'm always like asking for more feedback. Like, tell me how I can do better with this. Something else to consider when it comes to critiques, like there's always going to be trolls out there. There are going to be people who are mean for the sake of being mean. We know this. And you have this idea of, don't listen to the trolls, don't listen to the negative commentary, you're doing great. But then you have other situations where people are like, you need to hear our voices, you need to listen to us, you're not doing this well, and you need to educate yourself. And this is where I think the double standard comes in. Like, are we or are we not supposed to listen to feedback? And this idea that reviews are for readers, I think really comes back to this idea that you shouldn't be listening to the critiques because you're being too sensitive about it, which is a whole other thing. Like, some creators are going to be more sensitive than others. That has a lot to do with experience. That has a lot to do with privilege. Whenever, for instance, if I get a really mean comment on my videos, like, I take that to heart. When someone talks about the structure of my body, something that I can't help, like, that hurts. But if someone wants to comment on the way I've argued about something, I'm like, okay, let's open up a conversation with this. Tell me where you're coming from. I'll tell you where I'm coming from. We'll have a conversation on it. Maybe we'll both learn something new. Maybe we can each educate ourselves and go forward from this. But people are going to accept critiques in very different ways, and that's not really something that any of us can control. If an author is blasting a previous fan of theirs, is going so hard on this reviewer about how shitty they made them feel, like, that's not good. The author needs to know how to accept feedback. That's just it, though. Like, an author is going to look at their reviews. You cannot tell an author, don't look at the reviews, the review isn't for you. You can't tell them that. Because coming from the perspective of an artist, I need to know, like I said, what people think. I need to know what my audience thinks. Because yes, my art is very much for me. I'm doing it because I enjoy it. I'm doing it because I think it's nice and I want people to see it. But I also have to look at the perspective of what do these other people think about it? Because if I want to really get my art out there, not only do I have to celebrate my own voice, I have to celebrate the voices of others. I have to accept that not everyone is going to like what I create. My style is not going to be the same as everyone else's style. That's something I think a lot of authors could work on. A lot of authors that have reached out to fans on Twitter, I see, are just not accepting the feedback well. And that's where people are really fighting back. Like, well, the review isn't for you. But it is. But it's not, but it is. So this whole video is probably going to be super repetitive. But if I write a review for this camera, like, I want other people who might be purchasing this camera to know about my experience with this camera, to understand how to work it, to understand if I think it's a good product based on such and such an experience. If the creators of Canon happen to see this review, I'm not going to tell them, well, the review wasn't for you. It's for people who are buying the camera. But the review would also be for Canon. I would hope that Canon as a company would look at reviews on their site, look at that feedback, and use that feedback to make a better camera, or to change up certain aspects of a camera so that they can re-release it. We see this with makeup channels a lot, where people are reviewing an eyeshadow and they're like, well, I don't think this blends well. And yeah, they're talking to the audience and saying, I don't know that you should buy this palette based on my experience. But they're also talking to the creators and saying, you need to do this better. So the idea that a review is for a reader and not for anyone else, I think is very limiting. And like I said, it highlights this double standard where you can't look at the review because the review's not for you. But also, how are you supposed to learn how to do better if you aren't willing to accept that feedback? There was one comment on Twitter that I saw where someone's like, oh, this reviews are for readers thing is coming up because Daniel Green made a video on his reviews. I've watched the video. I have absolutely no problem with Daniel talking about his reviews. He is an author. He is an artist in his own way. He is excited about his work, but also he wants to know what people think. And in this video, he's like, I want to talk about us assuming what authors are thinking. And I didn't want to make a video on this previously because I hadn't written anything for the general audience. And I didn't want to put words in other authors' mouths. But here he is, he's written his own novella, and he can finally comment on what he was thinking when doing this book, and he can comment on these reviews because he's not putting words in other people's mouths, he's telling you his experience. I thought the video was great. He was very respectful of other people's opinions while also giving his own view as an author of the book that was being reviewed. And he even says during the review, or during the video, I look at some of these reviews, I take some time to think about them, to consider them, and then I'm going to go back and edit my next bit of writing so that I can make some things a little more clear. Like, he's using that feedback to make his writing better, which is exactly what I think he should be doing as an author. Like I said, I have no problem with that video that he made. I'm glad that he was able to have this respectful conversation where he was talking to people who were reviewing his book, he was accepting the feedback, he was trying to better his future work, not only so that he can enjoy his work, but so that his audience, who he is writing for, can enjoy his work. You also have the series by Murphy Napier where she talks about dear authors. So she'll put out a tweet or an Instagram and be like, dear authors. I think the recent one she did was falling action. So what do we not like about what authors do with falling action? What do we like about how authors handle falling action? All of these videos on characters, on plots, on villains, on falling action, on beginnings, where she's having a discussion based on feedback from her commenters on what do we think these books are doing really well? What do we think these books are doing really poorly? And she does say at the beginning of the videos, like, she's not a writing channel, she's a book channel. Like, she's just looking at feedback from readers about the books, but I would hope that writers who want to be better, not only better writers for themselves, but better writers to get themselves out there, I would hope that they would watch her videos and would take that feedback and would learn from it and would edit their books a little bit. I'm not saying don't tell your story, don't be true to yourself. I'm not saying that at all. Like, write what you're gonna write, it's your story. But also, if you want to get your voice out there, if you want to not be seen as problematic, you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to accept that feedback. I think those videos are great. I have no issue with the idea of authors reading their reviews. I do agree with readers that some authors, a lot of authors unfortunately, take it way too far. Hey everybody, back again already. I know, same outfit. It's actually just like 10 or 20 minutes later, because after I filmed first part of the video, I went ahead and popped onto Twitter like, so here's this discussion on reviews and I disagree. And Jashana actually reached out to me, and she's totally fine with me sharing this conversation, and talked about her viewpoint on reviews in general. So I'll go ahead and kind of include like screenshots here so you can follow along. But it was discussion on how an author is inserting themselves into the conversation. She talked about how Daniel had responded to the Goodreads review that he ended up talking about in his video, and the guy had responded, I can't really tell you like how to improve your book because I'm not a critical editor. I'm not here to really give feedback to a writer. I'm here to give feedback to the audience, which isn't even an angle on this that I actually thought about. So I'm really glad that she reached out to talk about this, because like I said, I want to be open to conversation on this. I could easily change my opinion. And she talks about how authors insert themselves into conversations with reviewers when really they should be having those conversations with beta readers, critique partners, and professional editors. Like, it's their job to give you their opinions on what you're writing, on what you're creating. It's not necessarily the reviewer's job. So when I think of reviewing, I think of it as this whole social media thing where we rely so much on what others think of us. And I feel like that's kind of the perspective that artists and writers are taking, where it's not a reviewer's job to tell you how to do better. It's more their job to tell the audience, this is what I think. But also, in these days of social media, you rely so much on what others think of you. Like, whenever I think of movie reviews, for instance, it'll say that viewers of this film absolutely loved it. They thought it was great. But critics of this film thought it was trash. And that always makes me think, like, why do the critics and the viewers have such different opinions on this one movie? Like, did the schooling that the critics go through make them a little jaded toward the film? Do they just see things that the average reader or the average viewer just doesn't understand? I think that's another interesting thing to think about, is what are people's education on this thing that they're commenting on? How is that going to make their views different? Why is a critic's viewpoint of something so vastly different from a layperson's viewpoint on something? Something else that I had commented to think about, like, as a small-time artist, as I've said, from my perspective as an artist, I rely very much on client feedback. I want my clients to tell me what they think of my art, because they're the ones who are out there selling me. In art, you learn word of mouth is the way you're going to get out there. But if you have a big-time author, someone like Daniel Green with over 200,000 followers, they're going to be more, like, if you have someone who is like me and designing a logo for a small-time client, I'm going to rely on that small-time client's thoughts about me, thoughts about my artwork. But for someone who is hosting an art gallery show in New York, they might rely more on critics' remarks, because people are going to read reviews from those professional critics in newspapers and determine whether or not they're going to see the show from there. So there's so many super interesting ways to look at this. And even now, talking to Jashana, I'm like, oh, I have all of these other thoughts that have already changed my perspective, and I just started this video like 20 or 30 minutes ago. And here's something really interesting that I think can tie everything together. Joshana says, I definitely agree that sometimes authors can view reviews and see trending opinions and think of things they could do better. It's when they insert themselves to ask for advice or give their justifications to the reviewer that makes me hella uncomfortable. And, okay, if you just missed any of that, my battery died, like, in the middle of me talking, so if you missed any of that, that's why I'm including screenshots in this little bit. So, continuing with this, even as I'm recording this, we're still talking. It just shows you how excited I am about this conversation. She goes on to say, reviews can be for them to view and learn from, but I don't believe that they are for the author to insert themselves and start talking to the reviewer uninvited. I would agree with that. I think you should very much listen to reviews, listen to your audience, use that to better yourself. But this can also come back to some reviewers just being trolls and being weird for the sake of it, and some authors being oversensitive, where you need to very much just be careful of talking with people directly. Like, I definitely want to look at reviews for, say, my website and be like, okay, here's ways that I can make it better. But I don't necessarily want to reach out to every single person who writes a review. That might make them uncomfortable. They're like, I was just stating my opinion. I mean, that's the thing with the internet, is you're able to talk about your thoughts and feelings without necessarily having to come face to face with people. And I think that's everyone's right to not have to go face to face. I mean, you shouldn't be super rude or anything, but you can say what you're thinking without so much fear of being edited, if that makes sense. Something else that Joshana points out is a lot of people think it's really awesome when an author comments on their review. So if I have a really good review about a book, which I've had before, where an author comments, it's like, oh, thanks for the review. Like, that does sound really cool because you really enjoyed this piece of art, and then the creator of the art actually reached out to you. And I think this is a whole different conversation. I've seen some videos on parasocial relationships lately, which are really interesting. Like, I definitely get hooked on people that I watch on podcasts that I listen to. Like, I am constantly messaging the I Don't Know Her podcast on Instagram, and I hope I'm not annoying them. But there's some videos on parasocial relationships. I'll go ahead and link those down below. But I think that leads us into this whole other conversation of how we feel like we're best friends with the people that we watch on YouTube. Whereas the people that we're watching on YouTube, they're just talking to a camera the whole time. They're not actually talking to a living thing. Well, maybe some of them are actually talking to living things. But I think that brings us into a whole other conversation that I don't even know how to have. So I'm going to link some videos down below on parasocial relationships. We can all learn more on that together. I think I can finally close off this video. Shout out to Joshana for reaching out to me. Thank you for the conversation. I super appreciate it. Like, subscribe, all of that stuff that I already filmed. Maybe I'll put it after this. I don't know. Bye, friends. So, hopefully you were here for this whole chat. Tell me down in the comments, do you agree or do you disagree? Or are you neutral on reviews are only for readers, and why? Again, this is my own opinion on the situation based on my own experiences. I could very well have a totally different opinion in the next hour, in the next week, whatever. But while you're here, please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. I'm always open to having new conversations. I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.